I want to express my gratitude for this opportunity to be in conversation with you about issues of religion and race and gender and sexuality. In particular, I want to thank Dr. Schlager for being so gracious and attentive in extending the invitation. And I also want to thank Emily Cardiff for likewise being extremely gracious and helpful and skillful in helping me with the tech. Now, I am honored to be invited to offer this lecture named for my Methodist denomination's scholar, teacher, leader, Georgia Harkness. As most of you probably already know, Georgia Harkness was known for her attention to global politics of war and peace, as well as a deep and active commitment to global Christianity. As United Methodists historian Christopher Evans and Christian ethicist Rebecca Miles have pointed out, in the 1930s, Harkness, quote, gave voice to a growing Christian internationalism that repeatedly called her colleagues to look to the churches of the developing world in the Southern Hemisphere. Harkness said, quote, God has more truth yet to break forth from his holy word, and we may look for it to break forth in Asia, Africa, South America, and the islands of the sea, unquote. My Africana decolonial work definitely has resonance with this Harkness tradition of global commitments. My most recent big project, a book entitled Solidarity and Defiant Spirituality, that forms a major reference point for the talk that I would like to have with you today, is indeed a transnational project. This work reflects a long-standing theme of my work. My teaching and writing on religion, race, gender, and sexuality have been primarily focused on gender violence. Now, in this project, Solidarity and Defiant Spirituality, I interviewed Africana activist leaders and scholars in Ghana and Brazil and South Africa whose work focuses on ending gender violence. I explored the role of religion and racism in their work and what it might mean for us here in the United States to learn from their ideas. I explored what it would mean to conceive of some notion of transnational solidarity in that common goal of ending gender violence. I spoke with the activists about their leadership and ideas and organizing strategies, specifically on the forms of gender violence that I focused on were heterosexual marital rape. Primarily, I had those conversations in Ghana, and on the sexual exploitation of children by tourists, and primarily I had those conversations in Bahia in Brazil, and the targeting of Black lesbians and gender nonconforming community members for rape and murder. So I spoke with activists and leaders primarily in South Africa on that kind of gender violence work, which I'm going to reference a little bit later. Now, I hasten to add really quickly, I want to get in that I'm not inviting you to some kind of distanced, objectifying, Christian paternalistic observation of the other in the global South. But rather, I'm inviting you to venture with me into the fraught dynamics of learning from intercultural transnational encounter and the possibilities for solidarity that are within those encounters. So method is crucial. It's a crucial dimension in the content of our justice work. So I want you to note that Georgia Harkness was known for her methodological disciplinary stance as an applied theologian. She was, in fact, criticized and in some cases derided for being an applied theologian. As a pioneering woman teaching in a seminary, her teaching was sometimes not appreciated. As historian Rosemary Skinner Keller summarized, quote, it wasn't appreciated for, quote, closely relating theological inquiry to social justice and the practice of ministry, unquote. My methodological moorings resonate with this Harkness tradition as well. I invite you to be fully immersed in a dialogue between theory and practice. That's the only way I know how to do this work. The ways in which we conceptualize systemic white supremacist sanctions for gender violence directly illumine communal practices, including church practices, and even the capacity to creatively imagine the liberative meanings of a blackened transnational and intercultural solidarity in disrupting those systemic sanctions for violence. It requires some reference to actual shared, lived realities, experiences, and practices that exhibit our capacity to depend on each other and learn from each other. Conceptualizing and practices, they're in a dialogical relationship. So I want to stress how I am interested, especially in the ways in which scholar activist church leaders can create common understandings that undermine society-wide patterns of abuse and intra-communal betrayal. And instead of being so tied and moored and constrained by that abuse and betrayal, how can we instead deepen our solidarity with one another? You know, sometimes I think that my own bisexual identity, lived out for most of my life with a heterosexual partner, that both the how bisexual identity always retains access to the space of heterosexual privilege and heterosexual status, as well as the erasure in queer thought and queer communities, that the combination of both of those, status and privilege and erasure, sometimes I think that energizes my interest in betrayals and solidarities. Or maybe my own lifelong journey as a Black United Methodist, baptized as an infant in a Protestant denomination, United Methodism, that to this day retains a membership of over 90% white people in the United States, at least, United States membership. But maybe that instigates this interest in betrayals and solidarity. I don't know. But I do know that finding ways to collaboratively undermine abuse and betrayals is absolutely crucial for creating the kind of solidarity in ending gendered violence that I want us to be committed to. So this moment, this is a moment, right? This moment, this 2020 moment, is a time when there is so much public attention to systemic issues. We can really focus on society-wide patterns of abuse and intra-communal betrayals and how they're related to violence in this moment in so many ways. We can become bolder in our defiance of abuser logic that thrives in its insistence on isolation. Abuser logic is part of the logic that keeps us in those kinds of betrayals and society-wide abuse. And abuser logic isolates the person who is victimized and stresses how bodily violation and emotional abuse is just an isolated incident. Abuser logic is something like, I may control who you can text, but I never hit you. I may have allowed my 8-year-old daughter to playfully touch my genitals until arousal, but she flirts with me. She enjoys playing around. Or we had sex when you were drunk and totally out of it, but it was just that one time, right? This is a moment of defiance of that minimizing, isolated incident, deep betrayal, abuser logic. This moment of protest, when so many people all around the world are collectively expressing that they have run out of patience with violence and abuse and indifference to basic bodily human rights that are based on the indifference to basic concern for those bodily human rights. They've run out of patience with all the ways in which violent abuse and of state police power is nurtured by a deeply embedded sense of racist entitlement. This is a moment when we can almost feel the intense vulnerability, of being a Breonna Taylor and being at home in your bed, asleep, and almost understand what it means that after she was shot to death by the police, a Kentucky Black prosecutor claimed that shooting was justified. That when we can experience that moment of in this 2020 moment of listening to Reverend Bernice King speaking about the civil rights leader at the memorial service of civil rights leader and LGBTQ rights civil rights advocate John Lewis. Remember, she was speaking at his memorial service and remembering her fervent opposition, right, to same gender loving people's right to get married in Georgia as a civil right. And how she famously, that famous quote when she was leading marches and fighting against marriage equality, she said, "My father did not take a bullet for same-sex marriage." Right? We can experience right in this 2020 year that horrible, tragic, gut-wrenching plane crash killing basketball star Kobe Bryant, his child, and several other people on that plane. And in the aftermath, one Black male celebrity inciting violence against a Black woman celebrity national news anchor for even mentioning the sexual assault accusations against Bryant that had been such a significant part earlier in his career. This is a moment when we have to grapple with issues of race and nation and cultures and fueling anti-LGBTQIA plus hate violence. United Methodist Church is a case study in how the church fuels such violence. Now with its so-called traditional plan globally in place and taken effect since January 1, not only maintaining the innate superiority of heterosexuals, but also making a more efficient expulsion of those who are lesbian and gay and transgender, queer, plus their allies in the church can more efficiently be booted from the church. And the United Methodist Church grappling with the Black African United Methodist conferences and bishops who seemingly en masse support those policies, and thereby sacrifice the safety of African LGBTQ Christian community members who are imperiled by hate violence in Africa. But at the same time, the United Methodist Church, right, not grappling with the role of Russian delegates' support for the same plan and the implications for the conditions of Russian LGBTQI community members who are imperiled by hate violence in Russia, not naming the whiteness of the white US Southern supporters or the whiteness of the white mid-Atlantic US supporters of the traditional plan. This is a moment. We're breaking out of abuser logic. means confronting multiple patterns of transnational and national, community-wide betrayals of human dignity, of freedom, of human worth. Now, I'm particularly interested in gender violence. That is, in confronting patterns of gender violence and its imprint and its expression as Christian-based racism. Gender violence is a form of racism. Gender violence is a form of racism. US Americans should understand this, right? You should understand this because of our history, we're culturally saturated with abuser logic of denial. Our cultural understanding of moral exceptionalism denies the depth of our cultural commitment to gender violence. As I cited in this Solidarity and Defiant Spirituality project, Joe Biden asserts that world leaders look to us. He said that we are trying, quote, we are trying to export to other nations, unquote, our globally exceptional consensus on opposing gender violence. That's a typical form of denial, of a failure to confront historical embeddedness of racist rape culture, right? One of my examples that I often point to of this embedded historical legacy is Thomas Jefferson's 1776 Declaration of Independence assertion. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that alongside of that assertion is the fact of his rape of his 14-year-old slave, Sally Hemings, when he was approximately 40 years of age. Note that the invocation of the notion of that human freedom and equality, he includes this idea of how we're endowed by our creator. In those iconic words Jefferson penned in that Declaration of Independence, there's a divine imprimatur of rape tolerance tradition that's embedded in a US society. And no matter what your racial or ethnic origins might be, all who reside in this US nation, are morally formed by this legacy of divinely blessed hypocrisy and valorization of Thomas Jefferson's words, of his iconic message, of the ways in which a child rapist, Thomas Jefferson, is valorized. Finding solidarity in the confrontation of that reality can be difficult. I can hear some of you, I can hear you asking, is that my racial group's history? Is that my ethnic group's history? Or is that's that sad fact, that rape of Sally Hemings, that's Black history, that's sad Black history. But I say no. Confronting the moral influence, the collective moral disciplining of this national history, that confrontation, it's tough work, but it's a crucial step in the solidarity work that I'm calling us to. Now, that solidarity work, it means recognizing that legacy as well as confronting our current realities of rape culture, the ways in which our current racist anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy exemplifies transnational racist rape culture. The current federal white nationalism gives practical expression to anti-brown and anti-Black racism that fosters gender violence, not just in the rhetoric of Mr. Trump's, such as that iconic instance of Mr. Trump in that 2018 meeting, you know, that conversation he was in with all of these high level senators from across political parties. And they were discussing asylum policy and immigration policy for migrants, including migrants that are coming up from the South and seeking asylum because they're fleeing gender violence, such as gang rape and femicide. And remember how at the meeting reportedly Trump said, quote, "Why do we want all these people from Africa here? They're shithole countries. We should have more people from Norway," unquote. Now we know that he expressed what so many in the public believe. And I want to say, no doubt some of you listening to me have some version of that narrative in your head, some version of that narrative that he gave such frank and honest expression to, that makes what I'm saying methodologically strain your imagination, that an encounter with Black Africana activist leaders is a crucial way of us receiving the knowledge and the strategy and the ways in which we can be energized and informed and work and enabled to do the unlocking of systemic support for gender violence here in the United States. Yep. Comments such as Trump's, as well as specific policies put in place by United Methodist, for example, United Methodist Jeff Sessions, who invoked scripture as he put in place the zero tolerance white nationalist policy of caging and kidnapping brown migrants. To ensure, he also ensured, specifically created a specific policy at the same time that made intimate violence, domestic violence, no longer a criteria that can be considered for asylum. Christian activist leaders such as yourselves, some of you out there, such as myself, finding solidarity to confront these examples of anti-brown racist rape culture. Some of you might be whispering to yourselves, how does this rape-supporting anti-brown racism get incorporated into a Black Lives Matter priority? Or how should it get incorporated? These examples of the present transnational racist rape culture and these kinds of hypocrisies about political equality, all with explicit divine sanction, they are an agenda for the kind of solidarity work that we must do, but it is difficult. Finally, I want to give an example of engendering defiant spirituality in a communal way that comes from my book project, and specifically when I was in South Africa. I met these leaders of a group called Free Gender. And this group works, Free Gender, these leaders of Free Gender, they work on a collective action to form alliances among Black lesbians, bisexual, transgender, and intersex women as an essential part of building solidarity and creating change to end the targeting of lesbians and non-conforming gender, people who are non-conforming in their gender expression and presentation, who are members of their communities, and the ways in which they're targeted for violence, and trying to end that targeting in a systemic way, confronting police officers and the courts. So I was meeting with them, and I want to give this example of how I stepped into their space and the ways in which I was introduced to this open and affirming space, this free gender space, as a space where gender expression, especially by Black lesbians, especially masculine expressions of Black lesbian, expressions of what it means to be a Black lesbian, that there was this sense of this was a freeing space where leaders came together to defy the conditions of the threat of gang rape and murder. And in front of me, I'm just going to read one little section from this moment as I stepped into the room, and I saw this big red cloth with this writing on it that listed the members of their community who had been assaulted, but it gave numbers. So it said 1325 rape, 7505 2009 rape, right? Rape, murder, suicide, murder, assault. An ominously empty red space of fabric was left below the last notation on the list. As the possibility entered my mind that more cases could be inserted in that space, I guiltily rushed it away as if my thoughts could invite such tragedies. The cloth linking different types of violence together as it bore witness to the communities, costs and losses. Acknowledgement of the suicides, assaults, murders, and rapes on the red cloth seemed to constitute a spirituality of politicized collective grieving, like the Black Lives Matter protests, this politicized collective grieving. It claims space to grieve in the impetus to pursue justice in the courts. The cloth marked the group's timeless allegiance to the lives of the victimized Black lesbians, confirming a spiritual and political tether that defied the final ending their torturers had sought. The spirituality generated a defiant continuity that is a refusal to accept neither the final breach in the mystery of death by murder or suicide, nor the perpetrator's last words to survivors in the psychic theft that accompanied the brutality and bodily invasion of the assaults. This form of intervention on the meaning of space and time was particularly crucial in the aftermath of violence intended to send a threatening communal message about the reducibility of Black lesbian humanity to objects vulnerable to attacks at any moment in any public space. I'm going to skip down. I just want to read another section. Some in this group, some of them were Christians, some of them were not. And free gender members that were gathered there, they started to sing. And the a cappella harmony filled the room. They sang, "We glorify your name," with the melodious wail of the lead voice, followed by an echo response by the other singers. We glorify your name. They sang in English, then in Xhosa, and then in English again. With a slow, steady tempo, the tune slid up and down the scale in a heart-wrenching choral invocation of sacred spirit. The naked beauty of their voices enveloped the room, gripped me, held me. The comfort of their voices offered coexisted alongside of my captivity to that red cloth hanging with its Black letters. I swayed to the music, tried to sing with them, and swallow tears before they were seen. The repeated line, "We glorify your name," the glory attributed to the unnamed one whose existence was honored in the lyric, pointed to both a divine spirit as well as the victimized lives of those unnamed on the red cloth. divine spirit and Black lesbian humanity, in some cases murdered or dead by suicide, were spiritually present. Their intermingled sacredness was implicit in the words, your name. And then I describe also the ways in which the kind of defiance that took place and that I experienced in that room resonated with defiance also that occurred here where I live, which is in the Newark, New Jersey area, where Sakia Gunn, a lesbian teenager, was killed. A gender nonconforming teenager was killed because of her gender nonconforming and her saying to her killer before he killed her that she was not into men, and then he stabbed her to death. And the ways in which at the funeral, the church, a Black LGBTQ church, and the pastor and the leaders intervened at the memorial service between angry youth and the police. And they created this spiritual activist space honoring dignity. So I want to also give you one more example at the end of that meeting. It was hosted by, as this meeting came to an end, a free gender member of the group spoke up, and she started out tentatively and admitting that she was wondering what Elizabeth, that's the person who had hosted me and who was a local leader there in South Africa, working on gender violence, many forms of gender violence, and had introduced me to the free gender group, was there. And so this member of the group wondered what we thought of the church songs that they were singing. And she referred to me as one of the pastors. And she talked about her previous experience in her life of having been rejected by Christian leaders, and how she stated that in our meeting, she stated that Christian pastors think homosexuals should not be allowed to sing church songs. And then she looked at me with increased self-assurance and assertiveness. And she reminded me that a discussion linking Christianity and homosexuality was a very sensitive topic. And in that moment, my association with Christianity had engendered distrust and vulnerability. It cast doubt upon whether she could or should openly express her Christian faith in my presence because she was a lesbian. It had delivered the opposite effect from what I had intended, what I had desired, or what I was experiencing. As I listened to the spirituality and experienced them singing in that group, I felt the homophobic, terrorizing impact of our religion, her religion, my religion, and the impediments to solidarity it spawned between us. Once more, Christian spirituality could not be disconnected from its harmful political tentacles, especially for any conceptualization of spirituality that informed activist solidarity in working to end the violence. In that moment of confrontation and encounter, there was a glimpse of blackening solidarity that we need because of its capacity and commitment to interrogate white supremacist, colonialist, imperialist abuser logic in the room that fuels anti-LGBTQIA plus hate violence and other forms of gendered violence. This kind of defiant spirituality fuels the blackening solidarity. The defiant spirituality is a kind of collective encounter spirituality that is evocative of truth-telling intercultural, transnational possibility. Thank you.